Greetings, Elder Blacklight. We're talking about profiling our enemy, the Caucasian. See, we got to know who our enemies are. We got to even know ourselves. We got to profile ourselves also. But in these times, we got to go to the root of whatever problem that the planet or the society is dealing with and go to the root of that problem. That's the only way we could root it out. You know, when you got a weed in the garden, if you just pull it out from the top of the plant or the weed, it'll grow back. So you got to go to the root and dig it out. Another thing I like to say, if you're a new subscriber, welcome. And I'm not a type of guy that go into the comments section and entertain people's questions, because if you stick and just watch and observe where I'm coming from, whatever question that you have probably will be resolved. But see, remember, when you're asking questions, you got to look at the world around you. When you look at the world around you, you'll see that it'll fit in with what I'm saying. See, because I'm going to the root. Now, the black man and the black woman here in America, we didn't, we maybe we was here, you know, we was already here. Some of us was brought from other places, but we are the people of the planet. We just didn't stay over in Africa. We was all over the place. But the main point is, this wasn't our culture. We didn't live like the white man lived, because he came out the caves and was uncivilized while we were civilized. When he came out the caves, we already had the pyramids been erected for thousands of years already. You know. So anyway, he's studying himself. He's trying to find where he came from, because he don't want to believe that he came from us and then went to the caves. He want to believe that he was the first man on the planet. But we've been on the planet millions of trillions of years. So he's studying, his scientists are studying, because they want to control the gods. Now, some of you young bloods, y'all don't understand that, because y'all don't do research. And when you do research, you do research through the white man's eyes. So we had to have somebody come to give us the real deal, and that was Master Farad Muhammad. But before time, runs out on this video, let's pick up where they are doing research on population control by using rats. These are lab rats, albino rats. If that don't tell you nothing, then think about it some more.
To mate. Later on in the experiments, they would often find the corpses of the improperly cared for young, which they would cannibalize. In time, one of Calhoun's assistants would publicly describe these pens as hell. At this point, Calhoun ended the experiments, but he predicted that these pathological changes would have eventually led to the deaths of the colonies. At their conclusion, he would take the 4 healthiest males and females and allow them to breed, but their behavior had been so inexorably altered that none of their pups survived beyond weaning. This short article enraptured its U.S. audience, and the effects on both the scientific world and popular culture were immediate. People began to relate Calhoun's rat experiments to modern city life, and in an era where fear of social deviance was reaching an extreme high, it was largely seen as a reflection of the current time and where society could be heading, egged on by Calhoun's provocative language and allegorical design of its test environment, made to look like a city. Population density quickly became a common topic. Psychologist Carl Rogers, in his work Some Social Issues Which Concern Me, stated that, quote, "The resemblance to human behavior is frightening. In humans we see poor family relationships, the lack of caring, the complete alienation, the magnetic attraction of overcrowding, the lack of involvement which is so great that it permits people to watch a long, drawn-out murder without so much as calling the police. Perhaps all city dwellers are inhabitants of a behavioral sink." Unquote. Soon after, studies of dense urban environments were conducted to see if these effects translated directly to humans, but what they found was inconclusive and unsatisfying. Despite the suggestions of Calhoun's rats, humans in cities reacted differently or sometimes opposite the manner that researchers expected, depending on the location. No matter how they tried, no evidence of a widespread behavioral sink could be found in urban areas. But this did not dissuade Calhoun. Even as others explored the problem of overcrowding, Calhoun frantically continued his research. Now a celebrated success and emboldened by the public acceptance of his ideas, he resumed his work at NIM on an even larger scale, though again away from the public eye. He spent his time on new subjects as he continued to perfect his enclosures and experiments until finally, after 11 years, Calhoun revealed his magnum opus through an article he entitled Death Squared, which was published in the journal Proceedings of the Royal Society of Medicine in January of 1973. The lengthy opening to this article was undeniably apocalyptic. Calhoun wrote, "I shall largely speak of mice, but my thoughts are on man, on healing, on life and its evolution. Threatening life and evolution are the two deaths, death of the spirit and death of the body. Evolution, in terms of ancient wisdom, is the acquisition of access to the tree of life." Unquote. He goes on to heavily reference Revelations and of the riders of the apocalypse, using them to proclaim that the Hippocratic Oath applies not only to the body, but to the spirit. After this dramatic introduction, he described his test. For the most part, these new experiments were similar to his 1963 trials, including unlimited access to food and water, protection from the elements and predators, and safeguards against disease. Many parts, however, were drastically altered. As Calhoun mentions in his introduction, the Norway rats used in his first publicized experiments were replaced with albino house mice, which were taken from a breeding group from the National Institutes of Health made specifically to prevent communicable disease. To fit his new subjects, Calhoun had designed an entirely new enclosure. This version was much more vertical, with 16 wall-mounted housing areas for the rats at the tops of long metal tubes, which Calhoun called walk-up apartments. At the bottom of each apartment was a virtually unlimited supply of food, water, and nesting material. With the space provided, Calhoun estimated that it could potentially hold 3,840 mice. He named this enclosure Universe 25. Calhoun's methods also had changed. Rather than instituting population controls, he would interfere far less. His plan was to place 8 mice in the enclosure, 4 male and 4 female, and simply watch and wait. Calhoun observed 4 distinct phases in the ensuing experiment. Phase A was predictable, constituting the time period before the first new mice were born, which ended up being 104 days. For the mice, these days were, quote, marked by considerable social turmoil. After the social order was established and the first brood was born, the population began Phase B, which Calhoun named the exploitation phase. During this time, the mice doubled in number every 55 days as new young grew to maturity and had their own young. This doubling continued until day 315, after which the doubling rate slowed to a rate of 145 days, nearly 3 times as long. By this point, the different broods had clumped into one side of the pen, exhibiting the same sort of clumping as the Norway rats, but this time without any coaxing from Calhoun's designs. This change in the rate of procreation marked Phase C, which Calhoun labeled as the stagnation phase. This is when the most notable events occurred, and they eerily mirrored Calhoun's rat experiments. In a natural setting, those mice which find no social niche will leave the colony, but in this experiment, emigration was impossible, and so those forced to remain withdrew from society. These dejected males formed a large pool in the center of the enclosure. They quickly became characterized by both their inactivity and their many scars and wounds. Occasionally they would grow agitated and attack one another, and with nowhere to retreat, the recipient of these attacks would simply lay still and endure the assault. The outcast females, rather than joining them, would retreat to the highest apartments and live quietly among one another.
See, so, everything has a vibration. Even the architect designs of buildings in a city has certain vibrations. And these designs and scientific control, they call that a culture. Science call, when they're experimenting, they'll call what they're experimenting on a culture. Culture means to cultivate. So anyway, we're profiling our enemy because he's profiling us so he can control us. Now this coronavirus is part of the experiment. So they had a hypothesis that they could put on us, and now they working the experiment. And they already done dead in the minds of the black man and woman. Now they're working on the poor white peasants. They call that white trash. They throwaways. They're allowed to mingle with us. Because see, they got another breed of Caucasians. They call the blue bloods and so forth. They got a caste system, but they call it a class system. We're going to get on out of here, finish up on this on another day, but we're going to get back into the Supreme Wisdom lessons. This is Black Light.